been reading through your comments, and some of these comments are absolutely amazing. So today's video is about reading your comments. Some are funny, some are serious, some are very articulate in the history that we love on this channel. And do stick around because I may be reading your comment at the end of this video. We'll go to the YouTube channel. I am Braggy. I am a Norse, Anglo-Saxon and Viking reenactor. And once I even portrayed a Norman. Oh dear, what shock and horror. So we're going to go to the first comment. It goes to Swamp Sax, who says, "That pioneer home is awesome. Love the boar crest. The brooch must belong to the giant fin. Mac, cool. Thought," and a good emoji. So that is in today's long form video where I'm revealing a mysterious item which I showed in one of my many Anglo-Saxon treasure chests. And that's a fascinating video. Do check it out. And thank you, Swab Sax, for the comment. And you've got the first comment of the day. And I will reply at some point soon. And we'll go to the next comment feed. And this comes from Reynold Dus 1359. Hello and welcome. Based on the original sources, they really avoided hitting steel if they could help it. The idea was to use the shield to block the incoming blow and use the sword on everything else. Well, that is in relation to a combat video where I'm training Daniel how to use a sword. But of course, we're not actual warriors from the 8th or 9th century, we're reenactors. And we do often within the reenactment scene, don't fundamentally fight like they did. So when you're training somebody with a sword, you first of all have to get them used to holding a sword and also hitting another sword, because it does happen in reenactment. And sometimes we do that because it looks good and it puts a better display on. But fundamentally, if you are a warrior back in the day, you would be trying to not hit the sword and also try to attack and hit the enemy. But it's quite interesting, as I said before, that when you look at original swords, you'll often find, and let me just get my sword out here. So here's a sword. So on original swords, you find this, it's quite a common pattern. You'll find this section here is worn away, and this is where fundamentally you defend against other blows. And then this section here is also worn away, and this is the section which you attack with. So you're defending with this section, attacking with this section, and often the middle of the blade is not worn as much as this area and this area. And I have seen examples, and it's definitely true. And they often refer it like an hourglass. Yes, I mean, it's not exactly like an hourglass, but it does kind of go in concave, and concurve, and I find that to be fascinating. And let's just put my sword down whilst we find the next comment. So, the next comment from this comes from Dooble. So, hello, and a warm welcome to the channel. I got to reply to these comments. What original sources are those from, then? I've never heard anything of the sort in any Norse or Germanic Volksbücher going back to the 10th century. Even the earliest manuscripts like the Walpurgis Fetchbuch clearly depict sword and sword parry, riposte, even in the sword and buckler series. Well, yes, that's definitely true. I have seen some of the later medieval manuals and guides to sword fighting, and they do fight sword and sword. Because it's a good steel, if you've got a good sword, then it's not going to do a lot of damage, but the sharp edges will bite in. Don't forget, as reenactors, these are blunt most of the time, as we don't fight with sharp weapons. And then he carries on, he says, you use whatever is most effective to take your opponent's blade offline and bring your blade online. So you're trying to take the enemy blade out of action, and then get to the point where you get them swing round and then attack them on the shoulder or the back, and that will do a lot of damage. I don't believe for a second they were precious about their swords like you imply. Surviving blades have the damage to show for it. Yes, and that's definitely true as well. This is again where we get the instant about the wear here and the wear here, because when you're fighting, and especially back in the original battles, you're going to have little cuts from the sword, so you have to file it down and probably make it sharp again. So this is why we do find wear and we do find damage on original sword, and I think that's just fascinating. But let's go to the next comment in this comments video, which I've been meaning to do some of these, but now I've got my other phone, my other camera working, I can actually read your comments again. And we have a comment here from William, or Grace Elizabeth Hanson. I love reveling, or is it revealing? I love revealing. Oh, thank you very much. So I got a fascinating comment here, and it's talking about the longships and the sails, and I think this is well worth reading to you, because, you know, we always talk about weapons, but without the longships, well, the Vikings would never have travelled and would probably not be infamous as they are now. And this comment goes to AFC 3F6, and they say, I've been curious about the symbolic imagery of the red/white striped sail on Viking ships. Was red/white stripes as prevalent as popular depictions suggest? So, was it widespread, is what he's saying. What does the symbology represent? How long was the colour pattern in use? And did other cultures, such as the Mediterranean cultures, adopt it? You know, you could say the same thing with the Frankish culture. Did they adopt such things? Also, did it inspire the flag decision of the East India Company? And I think that's a fascinating reply. So, I'm going to read you my reply, which I wrote yesterday. That's a brilliant question, and one that sits right on the edge between history and the way we imagine the Viking world. From what we can actually evidence, there isn't strong proof that red and white striped sails were the standard or symbolic as modern depictions make them seem. A lot of that image likely comes from later artwork and storytelling rather than hard archaeology. I mean, you only got to think about the TV film The Vikings from 1967, I think, and I'm sure they have red and white sails. I then carry on. What we do know is that sails were incredibly valuable, often made from wool or linen. I got a debate about whether they're made of wool. I've always thought they were made from linen, but that could be true. And sometimes patched, repaired, or even enhanced using whatever materials were available. There are accounts of Norse raiders bringing back fine textiles from places like the Mediterranean, and it's very plausible these could end up worked onto the sail over time. That would naturally create the more colourful patchwork style sails rather than the neat uniformal pattern. So the colour could absolutely reflect wealth and success. Dyes, especially strong reds, weren't cheap or easy to produce, so a vivid sail would say something about the resources behind the crew. At the same time, it may not have been about symbolism in the way we think of flags today, more of a mix of practicality, repair, and a bit of quiet showing off. So what it's fundamentally saying is that if you've got a sail and your sail is colourful, or for instance, let's say somebody's, you know, made a dragon symbol or a boar symbol on a sail, it is saying that you have power and you have wealth. I'm just going and referring back to the East India Company. The East India Company comparison is interesting, but there is no direct link there. Just a similar visual idea appearing much later. It does make you wonder though, when these sails appeared on the horizon, in that pattern notice or the reputation behind it. And I think that is a fascinating point really. When we think about, you know, the sails, we always imagine sails being, you know, a bit like the massive sailing ships from the 17th and 18th century of being white, you know, because they were made from probably canvas back in those days, or very strong linen, for instance, and cotton. But of course, you know, they didn't have cotton, so they had to use either linen or wool. So it does make you think. For instance, if you got material and you're going to make a sail and half of it is white and half of it is red, then you may probably going to do some kind of a stripy patchwork, or even have half a red sail and half a white sail. It doesn't really matter what the pattern is, because the sail does a job on its own, and I think that's fascinating. So thank you for that comment. So we have a comment here from my dear old little brother, and he's called Eirik, the man of many axes, and he says, rocking the facial hair, brother. So, oh, thank you very much, Eirik. He's one of my best friends. If we ever get married, he's going to be my best man. And I've been trying to grow a beard, because for so many years on the channel, I've never had a beard, and I think to myself, well, I don't look very Viking, do I? And the reason why I've gone for kind of a goatee beard is because I can't cope with the itchiness on my face. So this I can tolerate, and I am going to keep on growing it for a while and see how it goes on camera. But it's taken a while to grow, and it's definitely not blonde like my hair, and I don't dye my hair very often. My hair is like a dark blonde colour. So yes, what do you think? Do you like the beard? And we have a comment here from Kincaid Koltoslav. Where's thy spear? Well, I have a spear here, but it's mine. You can't have it. And then we have a comment here from Leo 12 Gamer. So hello and welcome to the channel. I'll stick with my bastard sword. And then I replied, can't beat a, and I do apologise for the swearing, but a bastard sword is an actual sword, but I don't know a lot about bastard swords. It's something I need to look up actually and remind myself. But I say, can't beat a bastard sword, but you can beat a bastard with a bastard sword. That's a lot of bastards and reminds me of Game of Thrones, laugh out loud. And then I have a comment here from the Belfast Viking, Martin Brown, and a lovely guy. Hopefully, if not this year or next year, I'm going to definitely visit Belfast on purpose to come and see you and meet you for the first time. So, watch out, Martin. I'm coming to Belfast soon. And he says, you beat me to it, laughs out loud. So we'll carry on. So we've got a comment here saying that's a Norman helmet. I'm referring to a nasal home. Well, the Anglo-Saxons did use the nasal home. Yes, it is probably more associated with the Normans, but of course, from a Norse point of view as well, because there was around in the 9th and 10th century, if you were on a battle, and let's say the Norse were victorious, well, all the war gear from the dead enemies is going to get spread, you know, amongst all the soldiers, all the warriors. So in theory, you could, as a Norse warrior, wear a nasal helm, but I think that's up for debate. So we have a comment here from Javis Ivio. So Javis Irvio 2056, and he says, so sax is called so as it is, beside a weapon, a tool like the axe. Well, as I've got one here, a sax is fundamentally a tool and a weapon at the same time. It's not like an axe, because an axe is fundamentally a tool that can be used as a weapon, and probably, you know, when you think about it, an axe is probably used more for, you know, woodworking, chopping down trees and doing things around your longhouse. And if the enemy come, then you're going to use it in battle as well. And then they carried on saying, sea axe, unlike chopping wood, cutting rope or tangled nets, and so forth. Yes, I mean, it's funny how we have the Saxons and we have the Sax, which is S-A-X, which is the Norse way of saying knife. But then we have Seax, which is S-C-A-X, but we don't pronounce it Seax unless you're going way back into the 6th and 7th centuries, where some Mercian dialects may pronounce it more. I'm not a specialist on Norse and Anglo-Saxon language, I'd love to know what learned old English says about this, and I think as I've been invited onto a live stream, I'm going to talk about this subject with him, because it's one of those things we think about. So we've got Seax, S-E-A-X, but we don't say Seaxons, do we? So, and we have Langsax, a long knife, so you don't get mixed up with a Seax, with the way it's spelled with the C, because it doesn't have although it is spelled C-E-A-X, it's no association with the C. It's just that at some point in the language it just developed from Sax to Seax, but we still pronounce it Sax. And some days I pronounce it Seax or Seax, and some days I pronounce it Sax. And I'm trying to get a little bit better at pronouncing it more Sax. That's the correct way of saying it, even though there isn't no fundamental correct way, because, you know, if you go to Wessex, they'll probably say it's slightly different than somebody from Mercia, and if you go to the same time to Northumbria, then they'll probably pronounce it slightly different to what a Mercian or Wessex or somebody from Kent or Essex or East Anglia. So, and it's a bit like accents today, you know, because, you know, you take the word book and you can say books or books or book. So, you know, there's different pronunciation for different words in today's language, and it's probably very much the same. So we've got a comment here from John Holcomb 4178, who says, "Looked like a beginning of a good club to me," and that's in a reference to a crafting video where manufacturing in this area, as you can still see quite a lot of the wood chip, a wooden club. I have a funny comment from Segaman 83, who says, "I read that as Mercia and was greatly confused," and that was on a thumbnail about Mercia. And I looked at the thumbnail. Mercia is very clearly spelt and reads as Mercia, but it's funny how our brains and our neurology will sometimes read things differently. I sometimes get my dates mixed up. For instance, I had a meeting last Tuesday and I thought it was on Wednesday, and no matter how many times I thought about it, I was still convinced it was a Wednesday and I missed the meeting. Well, but that's another story for another day. And then we have a comment here from C. Musho Blaine, and he says, "Shot on a Mercian era camera, 2.4 authenticity." Oh yes, it certainly is a Mercian camera, as it's in Mercia. And then we have a comment here from King Edward the Turbulent Mill, and he says, "Nothing beats how our ancestors used to train before modern day weapons. A shame that we don't have the old laws for common people to train in case of war without joining the army like they did in the past before all these modern day garbage laws happen, where we, the people, can't defend ourselves without going to prison for it." Yes, and that is so sad, really. So, and it does remind me of, you know, the American War of Independence, when is it Lexington or Concord, one of the first battles, when they're fighting the militia, and then it just reminds me of the militia, how in villages the men would get together and they would practice musketry and drilling. But that's the same fundamentally if you go back, you know, 1,000 years into the 8th and 9th century. So let's say you lived in an average big, you know, village, you know, let's say there's 20 longhouses, and you may have 20 or 30 men. So probably once a week you'll get together and you would practice. You'll practice your shield wall, you'll practice throwing your spears and your axes, and you actually may do it on a daily basis or even more than once a week. That's up for debate. But we have lost that in society, and it's a shame, you know, they keep talking about bringing back the Home Guard, and I think that's a good idea to a certain degree. Not a good idea that they'll be used by the government for wrong things, but that's a whole different story. But I think there's a massive call for having something like the Home Guard again, because let's face it, you know, we live in perilous times. You know, is World War III, you know, on the pipeline? You know, we don't know. Hopefully it won't happen. and I do think at some point we'll see the equivalent of the Home Guard. And it's a bit like national service as well. You know, we don't have national service. This is why one of the reasons why we have a lot of problems with the youth today. And it's not fundamentally their fault, because let's face it, as a young man in your late teens and 20s, there's not a lot in society for you to do. You know, people are lost in society. So I think bringing back something like that would be interesting. And it is a shame that we don't have that practice of getting together and practice using knives and weapons. But whether that be a good thing or a bad thing, that's another story, but I think it's fascinating. So we'll carry on to the next comment. So Kincaid Kolto Slav. So the boar is on the warrior ethos, animals, berserker, bear, Lulfhedner, wolf. Then there was the boar and the raven. Well, that is very true. You know, we see those animals with such, you know, admiration and courage and bravery, and that is why, you know, we adopt them as symbols, and we wear a wolf's head and run around as a berserker going mad and doing crazy things. And we've got one more comment, and the last comment goes to Kincaid Koltoslav. Odin, did it bring a tear to your eye? And that's a comical play on words. In fact, I made it into a video yesterday and published it last night, and I do love a play on words. So if you've got any comments on reading art, I do urge you to leave a comment on this video. It'll be out at some point in the next few days. And if you've got any questions, then please also leave questions. On the community page, there's two community posts. One is a post about creating a questions and answer video. I've already filmed the first one, but I'm going to create another post in the next few days and ask for more questions. But I'm also asking for ideas. What do you want me to talk about? Is there any stories or folk tales you would like me to learn, as long as they're not massive long lists of names, which will take me forever. So please do think about asking me questions on the channel and suggestions for videos, because it's your channel as equally as it is mine. But I get all the revenue. Not that I make any revenue. YouTube do, I don't. Damn YouTube. Not monetised. That's Loki's fault, that. Oh, my sword.